It's Friday and another edition of the Zogby Report, real and unscripted. I'm here with my son Jeremy, as we always are. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing very well, and one of the reasons I'm doing well is, as you know firsthand, my new book is out, and it's called Beyond the Horse Race: How to Read Polls and Why We Should. There it is on the screen, and it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or the publisher, Rowman and Littlefield. And I hope you folks will consider it. Take a look at it. And we're going to talk about it a little bit today and more so in a future podcast. But I'll start off. And yesterday was I wouldn't say long anticipated, but short anticipated conversation, introduction, shall we say, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz to a press interview with Dana Bash at CNN. And I'm just going to say right off the bat, in baseball terms, no runs, no hits, no errors. I still think that she and Walz are basking in the glow of a honeymoon. CNN was the perfect medium for that continuation of the honeymoon. She does have momentum, and when you got momentum, you kind of hold on to the ball for as long as you can, try to run out the clock as long as you can. That is not to say that Dana Bash pitched softballs to them. There were some tough questions, but I think that Vice President and Governor Walz managed to deflect the questions and, come off okay. I think from their point of view, they did what they needed to do. And so I'm going to ask you to comment on some of your thoughts, and then we're going to get into the state of the polls where the race is. So what do you think?
Well, I mean, I can go in and I can critique, or I could, say what she did well or what he did well, but I don't think I want to do that. I think what I want to do is try to look at the reality on the ground, and the reason I don't want to do that is because everybody's made up their mind, right? I'm not gonna sway people. If people really love the interview or they like her, then chances are they thought she did either a good or a great job, as well as Walz. And if you don't like Harris, then you're on social media right now saying here's evidence of how awful she is and she will be. And so why are we even going to get ourselves involved in that, right? So I mean, let's try to take that as a launching pad into investigating and analyzing. And here's a perfect cue for you: beyond the horse race. So we can look at the horse race data, and then we could also get into some of the other important indicators of polling data, as well as real data that is a real economic data, I should say. And because polling, when you get into the economy, is perception. But we have hard numbers too, dealing with the economy. So, I mean, first thing is first. I have to say that in the grand scheme of things, no matter what polls you're looking at, I'm going to take an objective point of view, and I'm pretty sure you will as well. It's a tight race.
Mm-hmm.
It's a close race. Now, if you look to Rasmussen and Trafalgar, and we've talked about this, and look, I'm not going to trash them. They're our colleagues, but they almost always have the Republican ahead. Why is that? Is that possible? Is that you don't get to really dig into their data because I mean, to my knowledge, they don't link to the crosstabs, so you could really see what they're doing with their weighting. So are they showing higher rural turnout? Are they showing higher conservative distribution in their data? Are they showing Republicans turning out, projecting the turnout as higher? I don't know, but I just know that 9 times out of 10, a Rasmussen and a Trafalgar poll are going to show the Republican candidate up. On the flip side, you get the big media firm pollers and polling relationships, and that's Reuters, Ipsos, YouGov Economist, or YouGov and Yahoo, as well as, ABC and the Washington Post. And what I've been noticing is that they tend to show recently, since Harris got in the race, that she's ahead. That could be true. The thing is that they're showing Harris ahead 4, 5, 6, 7 points nationally. What happens when you look into their polling? Now, sometimes you can see their data or their methodology statements, and I want to share this, that, YouGov, in one poll that they released that had Harris 4 points ahead, they were providing the unweighted sample. Now, remember, when you cast a poll and you get out of the field and you have your unweighted data, Democrats usually are higher because they tend to answer polls slightly more than Republicans. That's why you have to wait for party. You have to bring them down. You may think that Democrats are going to turn out more than Republicans. I don't think that's the case in 2024 in the Armageddon election. I would say that it's roughly competitive. But nonetheless, I've seen YouGov polls showing conservatives under 30% of the turnout. And that's just not right. It's not
wrong. Right. Absolutely wrong. And this is not new, incidentally. But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you've been seeing this longer. I'm digging into this more and more. And then I'll give another example. Morning Consult comes out with a poll, and of course they have Harris ahead. And you can't see, unless you subscribe to them and maybe pay, which I'm sorry, I just wasn't going to do that. Don't do that for any polling firm. I saw their methodology statement, and they said that they had an unweighted margin of error. Well, you don't weight the margin of error. The margin of error is the reflection of the sample size. So you weight the sample. But they're saying that the data they had was the unweighted margin of error. What they really mean to say is it's an unweighted sample. So again, they're not revealing to you the political party distribution. And that could very well be why they're showing Harris 4 or 5 points ahead, because they have more Democrats in their polls. I suspect that's what's going on. And last but not least is the example of another YouGov poll with Yahoo, in which they said they were using 2022 party weight. Well, 2022 was a midterm election. Right. Okay, unless I misunderstood this. I mean, they said they referenced 2022, and then they said also Pew. So I mean, are they combining weighting from different sources? But why would you even use 2022? That's a midterm election. That's a different animal of turnout. So I wouldn't do that. I'm going to share another example, yesterday's Reuters Ipsos poll. And I think they had Harris ahead by just 1 percentage point. Is that right?
They did, yes.
Yeah, okay. I couldn't find the link to their crosstabs. And I don't like that, because when we do our polls and we do a release, we always link to the crosstabs, and we make our crosstabs very readable so that you can see our weighted sample, party, gender, race, education, and everything else that we may wait for. And a lot of these firms are not doing that. And so that's suspicious. And so anyway, long story short, Ipsos said that their adult population, their adult sample is weighted for census. That's standard. And then it said party may be weighted. Well, no, party should always be weighted when you're dealing with voters, a voter sample. And so these are some of the things that I think you probably very, succinctly described in your book based on what I've read. I'm still thumbing through it. It just came out. But this is what's going on in 2024. And we're trying to educate consumers of polls, because I think our democracy and our republic is a better place when we know how to understand and how to read polls. And so my closing statement is, with all of that said, this is a competitive race, and you still have events and issues that are going to surface that are really going to move the needle. And I'll get into some other things, but I'll let you respond.
No, I'm in total agreement. And, the business needs to be transparent. And frankly, the organization that represents us pollsters, one of the organizations, mandates transparency, but I find that it only selectively enforces transparency. In fact, some of the leading establishment pollsters are among the worst violators of that transparency. But with that said, just the state of where we are, I think it's safe to say on a continuum, since she got into the race, momentum is on her side. And I say that because, well, obviously, it was competitive when Joe Biden was in the race. But as we've said many times before, he had nowhere to go. He was going to be dominated by his age and mental acuity, and it was going to be very difficult for him to move the ball forward. She has, as we've said before, she has taken away the assumption that the Democrat is going to lose the Southern Rim. And she's put several of the Southern Rim states into play. She has, in addition to that, she has started to climb among those key groups in the Obama coalition. And with that said, this is kind of a very interesting fact. If you look at the polling averages, Donald Trump was at 46.6% average on June 25th. He's at 46.6% average as of yesterday. That's really kind of intriguing. It means that he has not moved at all, that even thus far, and it's still obviously early, even with the Kennedy endorsement, maybe a little bit of evidence of his gaining a point or gaining a couple of points, but the averages haven't moved. And 46.6, that has been his output in the elections that he has run, 2016 and 2020. And I would suggest that the burden is more on him right now. One final thing about yesterday's conversation is that, and this is in agreement with you, Jer, that this was not one of those main events that undecideds and those who have not been paying attention would watch. I think the ratings were good, but I think, as you pointed out, the ratings were probably the true believers on both sides. On the other hand, September 10th, the first real debate, I think that's going to be the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I totally agreed. I want to bring up one phenomenon that I'm starting to notice, and this could play in the race, and I'll build on some of the other things you said. You know, I've been asking myself over the last 24 hours, I kind of just started to think about this. Where's Joe Biden, right? I mean, people have seen, I mean, he was at the convention, but you're not seeing the president. And I, you know, you can interpret that in a couple different ways. I mean, look, I think the reality is that he's in a bad way. I think President Biden is in bad shape. We know that because we saw that on June 27th. And look, June 27th was 2 months ago. He's definitely not in a better condition. One could argue maybe he's in the same condition. One could also argue that he's in worse condition. And maybe that's why we're not seeing him as much. And so that's significant because what that can play a role in this election where Harris is the VP, the number 2, among some voters could start to look like the incumbent, if you see what I'm saying, right? Mm-hmm. So there is this potential incumbent factor. Is Harris really the incumbent or becomes a quasi-incumbent just by default of not seeing Biden and the fact that she is the highest level of the administration after Biden? And so now what happens is that she had a little bit of a guard in terms of, you know, Bidenomics and look, you know, of course you could say it depends on where you fall on that side of the issue. But when you look at what I indicated earlier as the real data, you start to see that that could very well hurt her. And let me explain that. Because after all, Harris is number 2 in command, and maybe she's starting to appear more like the incumbent. And the fact of the matter is 2 things, you know, maybe I'll mention 3 things, but this always unfortunately happens when the Department of Labor comes out with a jobs report, and that they'll say that X number of jobs have been gained. But then you have to look for the revision, because the revision comes out and then the revision always reveals that there was lesser amount. And so, yeah, I'm not going to get
going
into
to disagree with you there real quick. Most often, actually, in the last year, the revision has actually been higher. But anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, but what happens when they reveal 800,000 lesser jobs over the year?
Different story.
So on the whole, there's less jobs. So I mean, I don't, you know, and it's going to be hard to take them seriously if they revise that up. I mean, come on. I mean, these are supposed to be the best economists and statisticians, right? We would be out of business if we were making these kind of mistakes. Anyway, I think we should hold folks accountable regardless of the administration. You know, in terms of energy, and look, I mean, it depends. If you talk month over month about inflation, you know, the cost appears less so. If you look at year over year, it starts to grow. If you look at before Biden entered office, it's even higher. If you go back to when Biden entered office till today, the price of energy is up 21, 22%. Voters aren't going to forget about that. And that falls, right, on Harris's lap because you're seeing more of her. She's the VP. She's running for president. You're seeing less of Biden. And the last thing I'll talk about is the border. And it's going to be very hard for her because this isn't just a Republican issue. We've been polling this for a year, but I've been razor focused on this. And you have Democrats, and it depends on the messaging, right? You're not going to get Democrats who are going to get along with the MAGA message. But when you talk about the border as a humanitarian crisis, which it genuinely is, a lot of Democrats in the polling are agreeing with that. And they're even citing the border, I'm not going to say as a top issue, but definitely not as a bottom issue. But the independents become key because among independent voters, the border is a top 3 issue. So this is not just a MAGA thing. A lot of Americans realize that the border is a very, very serious problem. I'm going to share a statistic with you. This shouldn't be happening in the United States. But last year, 150,000 children went missing. 100 of that. If you're from central New York, like we are, that's more than the entire city of Syracuse. That's staggering. And so, look, that's something that's going to be hammered on Harris as she was the border czar, and she's going to have a lot to deal with. Now, look, we know Trump, right? He's not doing himself any good, right? Because he can claim that he had the economy, and a lot of voters buy that. But the fact of the matter is, he's not really discussing how policy is going to be better. He doesn't. He just touts how he has the greatest this and that in history. And so all of these factors just keep us I think, in a state of a tight race because we are a divided nation. We are a hyper-polarized nation. And it comes down to the undecided and the swing voters who are, I'm sorry to be stark, but they're being tortured right now. By my estimation, come election day, swing voters and undecided voters are basically going to be going to the booth and choosing between whether they get bit by a copperhead or a rattlesnake. But objectively speaking, they're both rattlesnakes, right? And the last thing I'll say is the Kennedy factor. And I think the Kennedy factor was more a long game, that he would, in the long run, pick up the undecideds and some of the swing voters by adding that extra oomph to Trump, because the reality is Kennedy was polling from about equally the same amount of Democrats as he was from Republicans, but consistently he had been leading among independent voters. Now that changed in the last couple months, but that may not, you probably won't see the short-term gains in that, but the strategy was the long-term gain.
Okay, there's a lot there. But I'm going to just go off the rails a little bit here and suggest that the economy will be a big issue, of course, and how people feel about the economy starting in late September, early October is going to be decisive. abortion and reproductive freedom is not only an issue, but you did see yesterday Donald Trump, number one, come out against a 6-week ban in Florida, and then also make an announcement about free in vitro fertilization for those who seek that, indicating a significant modification of his party's platform. And that may, in fact, raise some real hackles among ultra-conservative evangelical Republicans. And then the final thing that I'll say is I think ultimately it's going to come down, as it did in 2016, who do you trust more? Who do I trust my future more? And right now, Donald Trump still has not gained the trust of more than his MAGA supporters. There is some momentum. Numbers are getting better for Kamala Harris, but that's today. That's August 30th. One final point, and then I'll make my final point. Go ahead.
Here's a polling question we're going to do. Who do you trust more, a copperhead or a rattlesnake? and I want to say I have some things to say about the abortion, but you're my dad, and I'm not going to undercut you. So we'll save that for a future discussion, great? Because we're trying to model to people how we overcome any differences. So why don't you have the last word?
Okay, and the last word is in 145 pages. You will find, I hope, meaningful discussion with a lot of stories, behind the scenes, back office stories about polling and polling decisions that we've had to make, the ones that we got right, and oh, it hurts, the ones that we got wrong, hopefully as honest and transparent as I could be. It's a read that I think that you'll enjoy. And there it is up on the screen. We'll talk about it more in the coming weeks. We're going to talk about a whole lot more in the next coming weeks. Have a good week.
Signing off.